All right, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Greetings from the Garden State. We're here with Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. Congresswoman, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. So we're going to get into your story a little bit and then just kind of take it from there. So it's not, it doesn't disclude you from being on the podcast, but you are not from Jersey originally, from Virginia, right? But you're from Jersey. Like, let's just say that.
Well, yeah. We moved around a lot. And then I was in the Navy, so then I really moved around a lot. So New Jersey is certainly the longest I've ever lived anywhere. And it is funny because people keep telling me in Washington, they keep telling me I'm so loud. I know, right?
What does that even mean?
I don't know, right?
Yeah.
So, I have definitely been like booted out of the quiet car on the train down south. But so I'm like, what? I'm not that loud. And it's funny because people are like, oh my God, it's because you're from New Jersey. And then I get here and I tell people, I go, people in Congress say I'm so loud. And everyone goes, what? You're not so loud. I go, I know, right?
Yeah.
But I don't know. There is this, I guess you just get used to living here, and there's just a lot of people. It's really densely populated.
Yeah.
I mean, to add to it, I got 4 kids and a dog, and I mean, you got to be loud around here to get your point across.
No one's going to hear you. No one's going to pay attention. You're just going to blow right by it. So when did you originally move to Jersey and then make it, kind of your home?
Yeah, about 15 years ago. Okay. We were living in the city and had wanted to move out, but before I had my 3rd kid, but we didn't quite make it. So I just had my 3rd, and we were in the city and dying to move out to Jersey, and finally found a place because at that time homes were still affordable.
Yeah.
Unlike now.
Yeah. What a world that was.
Right. It was a very different world 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so moved out here, and it was, after having 3 kids in the city, it was nirvana. Yeah. And I haven't looked back.
Out to the country.
And yes. It is funny because, like many New Jerseyans, I sort of like the buzz.
Sure.
I like living in a kind of, suburban. I remember when I moved here, I'm in Montclair, and it said where urban meets the suburban. I don't know quite what that means, but I kind of like the feel and stuff. But, I moved out here. I have deer in my yard and fox. I have a red-tailed hawk. And
cool.
I mean, it does. Yeah, it is kind of nature-y for some reason. It's great.
I mean, I grew up in Morris County, but then high school age on was up in Sussex County, up in Sparta.
Yep.
And I mean, that's like the sticks
compared
to like where we are now.
Yeah, it's beautiful. That's that's a lot of nature.
Yeah, when my parents were still living up there, like I'd love going up there, sitting with my dad on the porch, like have a beer. It's super quiet, just relaxing. But then I was like, I need a little action, and around here, like you said, I said before, I live in Bloomfield, but my fiance grew up in Montclair, has lived in Montclair her entire life. I was living in Morristown when we met, so like obviously we had a lot of towns to choose from, but being around here now, it's like, like you get a little bit of both. Like our neighborhood's really quiet, but when we walk 20 minutes, we're in the thick of it. And like all these cool small businesses and local businesses and all that kind of stuff is phenomenal.
Well, I think New Jersey is about perfect other than the affordability issues and the traffic.
Yeah.
But for exactly that reason, we're one of the oldest states in the nation.
Right.
So we are sort of what an urban planner's dream, right? Yeah. Because you have the public transportation, you have the small town areas, you have everything's kind of walkable in towns around here. So you have the different, Montclair's not huge, but we have 3 different town areas.
Yeah, basically 3 different downtowns in Montclair.
Exactly. So I love that feeling, and I think it gives New Jersey this sort of small town feeling in a funny way.
Yeah. And, we'll get into it more later, but so Naval Academy. Can I tell you a quick story about the Naval Academy?
Sure.
That was at the top of my list coming out of high school. Like I played baseball. I was pretty good. Mm-hmm. I wound up going to TCNJ, so stayed local. Cool. But I played for a team that was based down in D.C. over the summer, one summer. And one of our Naval Academy was top of the list. And we went to Annapolis during plebe week to play a tournament that weekend. And I was like, nope, not for me. Like they're like screaming in their faces, like eating cake, like 120 degrees out. It was crazy. So kudos to you for doing that. I mean, that was something.
That, I always wanted to go there. It's funny because my dad from West Virginia was in a Boy Scout troop. And when he was little, he said they went to the Naval Academy and it was the most beautiful place he'd ever seen. And he said there was some, I don't know, some probably Marine Corps guy or something telling all these Boy Scouts, like, look, we're going to give you these blankets, but don't try to take them because we've counted every single blanket. My dad said he still remembers. He was thinking to himself, how the heck can I take one of these blankets?
Yeah.
Then that was on his mind. But you're lucky you had that experience because my poor husband from California, right? He got recruited for football.
Sure.
He goes to the Naval Academy with the football team, and it wasn't plebe summer.
Yeah.
And he was with upperclassmen, and they took him out and about, and they're going everywhere, and they're telling him how great it is. And he shows up for I-Day for plebe summer and had no idea what he was getting into.
Oh, my God.
Had zero idea.
A little wake-up call, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, it was something to behold for sure. I mean, but like you said, if you've never been there before and you just show up on like a random day, like it's gorgeous. And obviously like a great school and all the stuff that they do and everything. But can we talk a little bit about like what made you pursue the Naval Academy and why and everything, and then we'll kind of take it from there.
Yeah. So my grandfather was a World War II veteran. And so, I grew up hearing some stories about that. My grandmother worked for the Army Air Corps in Cincinnati, and just hearing about how much he loved flying, how important it was, that service, and sort of the heroism that I've always associated with World War II and kind of that fight against tyranny, really made me want to follow in his footsteps. So when I was in about the 5th grade, I told my dad I wanted to fly, and he said, well, it's too expensive. He said, flight lessons are really expensive. You have to join the military. And I said, okay, well, I'll do that.
Yeah.
And, he said he really liked Annapolis. And I said, I'll go there. And he said, I don't know if they take women. And I said, I'll figure it out. And he said, I don't know if they let women fly. And I said, I'll figure that out too. And I guess that's why when I think about what this country means, to me, at its very core, it means opportunity.
Right.
It means it doesn't matter who your parents are or how much money you have or where you come from, that you're going to have a shot.
Yeah.
And I've seen that in my own life because when I entered the Naval Academy, women weren't eligible for combat positions. And in the Navy, that's ships and aircraft.
Sure.
That's like you could go on an oiler but not a destroyer.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And I graduated in 1994 with the first class of women eligible for these combatant positions. They had lifted those restrictions.
Yeah.
And I watched over time how being able to have a seat at the table, I mean, you cannot be competitive in the military if you were restricted from combat.
Sure.
It makes sense, right? And so watching how women were able to compete and compete and gain some of the top positions in our military. And that worries me so much given my background and the opportunity I've seen when we see now people suggesting that we should roll back all of that we should take away opportunity from people.
Yeah, especially because after your time in the academy and then obviously during your time, serving, you flew, I don't know how many missions, all over the world, really. The proof is in the pudding. It obviously can happen,
Well, and
it's obvious.
What's so much more interesting too is now we are fighting in places where there are combat positions that women have to perform.
Sure.
And men can't. So for example, if you're clearing a home and trying to gain intel in a Muslim country with women and children, you need to send a woman in because those, the women inside that building are not going to talk to a male soldier.
Sure.
So if you're trying to gain intel on weapons caches or where fighters are, they may talk to a woman soldier, but they're not going to talk to a man. So the Lioness Squad was so important in that role. And so having this diversity, having this fighting force that can perform any mission, it's not just going to be one type of soldier or sailor. It's going to be the breadth that the United States can bring to the table as a fighting force.
Right.
It's going to be important and a game changer.
At this point in your life, obviously, like, you have your breadth of experience, like all the stuff that you've done since when you graduated back in '94. At the time, because obviously it's definitely apparent now, but at the time, did you feel any kind of responsibility? Like you mentioned that you were the first class that they lifted those restrictions on. Did you and your classmates? Classmates not a good word.
No, yeah, my classmates.
Yeah, sure. That were kind of in that group. Was there a sense of responsibility? Like, this is a big thing that, like, we're doing in a a place that really has been restrictive.
I
know that was a
I
question
think
that was
we
all over
look
the
back
place.
on it,
Yeah.
because I was just one of my friends just retired from the Marine Corps, and she had, some. I think a majority of the first women Marine aviators came out of our class.
Yeah.
Because that was the first time they had lifted restrictions. So many of them were at this retirement, and so thinking about that and how that opened the doors, it seemed like a great responsibility. But I have to say, what I was thinking about was just competing and doing the best job I could.
Sure.
So I guess responsibility, because I wanted to prove myself.
Yeah, like
I
you
wanted to
belong
prove,
here.
like,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't a favor to me.
Right.
This is me serving my country in a really powerful way, and it's important. And so I guess there was embedded in that this sense of responsibility, like I have to do that.
Sure.
But there was also just this personal,
Yeah.
pride and service and wanting to do a really good job for your country.
The competitive thing, I totally get.
Yes,
like playing
yeah.
sports my whole life, and the college, I coached college baseball for a while too. So it's like, it's just like how I operate.
Right, and you don't think
I'm gonna
about
beat
it
you at
like
whatever this is. I don't care what it is.
And I don't think of
Ping
myself
pong,
as like a
video,
super
whatever.
competitive person. I'm like
Yeah.
a super competitive person,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
I think I'm like, I'm just here, doing my best job. And I'm like, but what's that guy doing?
Yeah.
I could do
do
better
it
than
than
yeah,
that? Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Exactly.
All right. So after your time serving, what was the mandatory service time was what at that point? 5 years, 6?
So it was 5 years for ships, but if you received aviation training, you
Okay.
owed extra time. So it
Okay.
worked out to being about 9 years after graduation.
Gotcha. And then, so after your time serving, did you? Foreign policy was kind of like the next thing that you got yourself into, or was it law school next?
I got myself into a lot.
Yeah.
Let's see.
I mean, there are a lot for sure.
So at the time, this was when we were entering into what would be 20 years of war,
Right.
the global war on terror. And there were reports of torture and rendition and putting detainees in Guantanamo without trials or evidence or charges. So having come up in the Navy, well, look, I grew up during the Cold War.
Yeah.
The wall fell when I was a senior in high school. And seeing how important democratic protections were to people in our nation and having the ability to see what it looked like if you didn't have those, because the Soviet Union and all the countries it overtook, that was always looming large in everyone's mind
Sure.
about what these communist nations look like.
Yeah.
And the difference between not being able to freely practice your religion, not being able to speak out against the government, being imprisoned without charges, if you disagreed, et cetera, et cetera. I remember one that was really chilling is when I found out you couldn't travel without papers. You couldn't just go on a trip. And for some reason that, when I was a kid, that was like, what? What if we wanted to, I remember telling me, what if we want to go to the beach? She's like, you'd have to get papers.
Yeah.
You'd have to ask the government.
Right.
Just that claustrophobic sense of restrictions on all your freedoms and why democracy was so important. I grew up with that, like everybody
Sure.
in the country did, which is why some of, this, debate over should Ukraine have just let Putin run over them is just so offensive and ridiculous. And so I grew up like that. And then, going into the military, I went to prisoner of war training camp. And there we were assured, look, you're getting tortured and waterboarded and, being forced to, survive in 65 below zero. Yes, I did get frostbite, as training, but we will have the ability to advocate for your release should you ever be a POW.
Right.
Because of we always have the moral high ground. We can get the world community to force this because we don't do this.
Yeah.
And so to then see those very same people from that POW training then implement a torture and rendition program, I cannot tell you how offensive it was to me. How it struck against, I'm like, how am I fighting in this military that is right now doing these horrible things to people that are so contrary to the values? How can I say we're fighting in the defense of freedom if we are not living by our values? Right. So after I decided when I got out of the Navy that I was going to go to law school because it was the court system that was the one entity standing against some of what we saw, because politicians weren't. Right. It was politically unsavory to question in the aftermath of 9/11, the war. And yet we needed courageous people to do that. And the courts were the one group, not sometimes as quickly as I wanted to, but the courts were doing it. So I decided to go to law school.
Okay. And then that's how it was Russian policy, right? And then
I was a Russian policy officer in the Navy.
Right. Okay.
I served in the Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Navy European headquarters. And so I implemented, I managed the relationship between the United States Navy and the Russian Federation Navy, and then we implemented some of our nuclear treaty obligations, did some exercises with the Russian fleet to try to say, look, if there's an emergency, we can't even talk to each other. We have such different equipment. We need some ability to do that.
I gotcha. And then, so go to law school, Georgetown, obviously another great school, so doing great. I mean, that's phenomenal. So coming out of law school, can we talk a little bit about kind of, obviously, you had your mission, why you decided to go to law school. When you got out of law school, were you able to start working in that place to do that work?
No. So I had two things happen. One was one of my professors who had done that work. And I took all these courses from him in law school. Yeah. And he had defended a Guantanamo detainee, and he was seen as a rising star in the legal profession. And I went up to him really sincerely and said, I want to go enter into this space and constitutional rights and that kind of thing. And he said, I must say very dismissively, he said, well, first you need to learn how to practice law. And I was like, oh. Well, I thought that's why I was in law school, buddy, right? Why have I been taking these courses from you?
Yeah.
So he said, look, you have to either go to a law firm or go work for a judge. And as I was in law school too, the global financial crisis happened. So I had a job in a law firm, and I went there to learn how to practice law. And as I was there, there was just a total meltdown of the economy. Sure. So I stayed there and practiced for about 4 years, and then eventually ended up back here in New Jersey at the U.S. Attorney's Office as a federal prosecutor.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, both my parents went to law school. That's where they met, was in law school. And then I remember, when I was 2008 was the housing crisis, right? Around then. And my dad is still a title insurance attorney. Like a regional counsel for a title insurance underwriter, and it was touch and go for a while because there was nothing happening. It was they were laying people off like crazy because no one knew what was going on. But
a lot of the people I started the firm with were laid off, and it was and I remember thinking, I really like public service.
Sure.
And I thought I would go to this law firm and learn how to practice law and then go into some sort of public service, but whereas maybe the U.S. Attorney's Office had taken people when I entered law school, had taken people out of these firms at maybe 2 to 4 years. Now they were taking people who'd worked there 7 years plus because of the meltdown and all the jobs. And I was afraid to quit because I was afraid I'd never work again.
Yeah.
That's how it felt.
Jobs,
if you get out of the workforce, I don't know how you're getting back in. But I really was looking to kind of re-engage in public service.
Yeah. Okay, so then U.S. prosecutors or U.S. Attorney's Office, and then at what point do you decide, I want to get into politics? And, how was that received? I guess let's do, at home, was your husband into it? Was he yeah, let's go for it? Was he really, politics? Come on,
Yeah, so I was at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and I had started there. There was a hiring freeze.
Yeah.
See my last comments about the global financial crisis.
Yep.
And so I interviewed, and the U.S. attorney came to me and said, look, we're not hiring federal prosecutors now, but I can offer you this contract position in the Smart on Crime work that Eric Holder's doing. And I said, well, that sounds really interesting. I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah.
And so I helped to start the district's first federal prisoner reentry court. And in doing that work and seeing, just kind of how there just were, if you look at the criminal history of so many people, you just see these inflection points where you thought like, oh my gosh, if somebody could have just gotten to this kid, in seventh grade, we could have seen a very different outcome here. Or if there had been this other opportunity, or if there had been more support. And so you start to think, when you look at a criminal history with abuse or mental health issues or education issues or a drug use, all this different stuff that goes on in some families and stuff, and you just think, there but for the grace of God, right? You just start to think, wow, if I was a single mom trying to raise a young man in this community, and there's this strong, charismatic male leader that is getting kids into crime, like how much of a chance would I stand in keeping my kid out of that kind of pathway? So, you start to sense like, gosh, I wonder if there couldn't be a better way. If there's another way we can tackle and address this. Should we be putting every dime we have into the Department of Corrections, or is there more we can do? So I'd left the U.S. Attorney's Office thinking, I want to find out a better pathway here. I want to study how we can get better results, how we can use our money more wisely and get better outcomes for people. And so I was doing that and kind of interviewing for several of those things. And then this was the first election for Donald Trump. And at that point, there were things going on that, I'd spent a lot of my life fighting against, and things I was opposed to. So I decided to run for Congress. But what I first decided to do, I went to meet with a friend of mine, and I'm like, look, there's all these issues people agree on. I don't know why we have to, have such division in our country. Yeah. So I'm going to work to bring people together and blah, 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 blah. And she was getting really bored with my idea. I could tell. And I could see it in her eyes. So she goes, well, you just have to, run for Congress. And I'm like, oh my gosh, seriously? Sure. I got 4 kids.
Just run for Congress.
Yeah, that is like Congress is not here. Yeah. Congress is not here in Bloomfield. Close. Congress is, yeah. So I'm like, nah, I don't need to do that. But I was raised Catholic, so I have a good, healthy dose of guilt. So I'm sitting here and I'm starting to think about it. And I'm like, well, I do know people in federal government from my time in the Navy.
Right.
And I do know people in state government from my time at the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I do have a husband who could probably float me for, the time it would take to run. I could quit my job and do this stuff. And I'm like, the more I thought of how I could do it, the more I started to feel like I have this responsibility. I've always been a firm believer in the fact that in a democracy, we all have a part to play. We all have this responsibility, whether it's voting or canvassing or phone banking or running. So I started to feel like I had this responsibility. And I went home, and I thought my husband would put a stop to it, because it did seem like a really bad idea with 4 kids, Yeah. And so I came home and I said, Jay, I think I'm going to have to run for Congress. And he goes, yeah, that's great. Yeah, that's a great idea. You should do that. And I asked him later, I was like, why did you say that? He goes, well, I don't know if I really thought you were going to run for Congress.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And he's like, next thing I know, you got this whole campaign going and we're off to the races. Yeah. So, but he was initially very supportive.
Yeah, which is great.
He's still been great.
Yeah, but, you need the support system around you to make, anything like that work.
Because it is. Yeah. It is always a big lift for the family. And I, all kidding aside, I never would have done it if I didn't think that the impact of what's going on in this country right now was going to be so bad for my kids that the best thing I could do is fight for a different vision of the future. And so I did it, but it is a heavy lift on everyone. And you do need a good partner. And I have always been so thankful, because I sometimes feel like if the shoe was on the other foot, I might be a little more of a martyr about the whole thing. Yeah. I have a suspicion, but no, he's been great.
Yeah, which is great. With anything, it's good to have a support system. So all the stuff that you've done Navy, U.S. Attorney's Office, all the basically, if you, for lack of a better word, fights you've been in throughout your career. What's Congress like? This is the first time I've ever actually interviewed a congressperson. So someone in the federal government. So I'm just curious, what's it like? Is it as, pomp and circumstance as it seems to be, or is it?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this weird amalgamation. You get there and you're going into the Capitol building.
Right. Which I only see on TV.
Right. And you're kind of like, what goes on in there? And you're there and you sort of have free reign. I mean, you can go inside as a member of Congress, you can kind of wander the halls of the Capitol in the middle of the night if you want, when it's empty, and just kind of look at the pictures and it's amazing. I mean, you walk up to the Capitol building, which is so iconic, and you're like, oh, here's my office. It's really breathtaking and really awe-inspiring and really amazing. And then on the flip side, you find yourself in these moments where you're like, this place has got to work better. We can't, there are so many chuckleheads here that are just fighting for themselves or just doing, whatever the president wants and not thinking that this is an independent body.
Sure.
That we are not just, to be subsumed by the executive branch. This is the legislative branch, and we have a role here to play. And you just see people who, quite frankly, are cowards. They just don't want to stand up. They don't want to stick out. They want to duck their head until the crisis is over. And I do just kind of, I think a lot about my military training in a way I've never thought of it before, because you take it for granted.
Right.
There are things you learned at TCNJ that now you're like,
yeah,
that's why I do this, or that's why I think this way, or
yeah,
this professor said this and that really impacted me. And you don't always realize that when you're young. You just think, oh yeah, I just had to attend that class and here I am.
Shut up, professor.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're on. Right? But and now you're like, no, those words actually, they were totally true.
Yeah.
And I think about that. The military trains you to overcome maybe human instinct in a crisis, which is kind of duck and cover.
Sure.
And to instead make decisions and operate in that chaotic atmosphere and do something about it and not shirk your duty and not run away, but run, like I say, to the fight. And that has probably, I was saying to somebody, they've probably developed this training system in ancient Sparta, right?
Yeah, right.
This is what you do. You do it because, oh my gosh, I remember in the military, you're constantly doing these things you don't want to do. You're constantly put in a situation where you're like, this is really scary.
Yeah.
I really don't want to go to prisoner of war training camp.
Yeah.
I really don't want to be
the
strapped
average
into...
human doesn't want to do any of that.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
I remember afterwards, you have this sort of, after the training camp, you meet with the instructors to have an after action report. And I remember this one guy looking at me saying, that was kind of hard. He goes, I really don't like hitting women. And I said, really? I really didn't like being hit. So
yeah,
there,
right. Yeah.
So
we all have problems.
Yeah, we all have to adjust.
Yep.
So you do all these things you don't want to do, and you kind of learn to do the hard things. And I think a lot of people, in times of crisis, a lot of people's instinct is to just not get noticed, to just do the easy thing, to just stay out of it. And I can tell you, everything that I've learned in my training would suggest that is the worst thing you can do.
Yeah. Interesting. And I always remember my parents talking about, because I was a political science major in college. Obviously, I do nothing with that now. But I always remember them saying, that's always a thing you can do. I mentioned they went to law school, but, it helps you, teaches you how to, think critically on stuff. And I feel like the combination of those two kind of, ideas when we're talking about being in politics, being in Congress, and now running for governor, all of those things combined obviously create kind of a interesting background that a lot of people don't have, which I think is interesting.
Well, I tell people it can be really hard because I remember getting out of the Navy and I have, almost 10 years of experience, and I've led men and women across the world, and I've, achieved some level of success, and I've flown helicopters and stuff. And then I get to my law firm and they're kind of like, you don't know how to do anything. You're starting from, you don't even know where the stapler is, right? Come on. So you start over, and it can be tough to do that.
Sure.
And then I went to the U.S. Attorney's Office, which having that federal service and the legal service felt like it melded it somewhat.
Right.
And, some of it came together, but it really, the neat part about Congress is that a lot of it came together. Those aspects, understanding that, and not just that, but also the fact that I'm a mom.
Right.
Like, you would have had a hard time. I mean, I was at a law firm, in the days when there weren't tons of women partners.
Sure.
It wasn't that long ago, and maybe it's still that way, but, you would have been hard-pressed to tell if you were a colleague of mine at this, intense, aggressive law firm, you would have been hard-pressed to talk about my family because I didn't talk about my family, right? So to get to Congress and have that be an added benefit is, look, I understand what it's been like trying to raise kids through COVID and the after effects of that and the mental health challenges with social media and how nobody has the tools to handle that and what can we do better? I mean, so whether it's the military or the federal prosecutor's office or the reentry court or raising kids, all of this feels like it's come together in this time to advocate for, just people across New Jersey who have all of these challenges and have faced so many of these things and just want to make sure that their family's okay, that their kids are going to be okay, that they're going to be able to retire and retire with dignity and not be out on the street. I mean, just kind of, knowing kind of so many of the aspects and then, again, running for governor and having all of that background. But then on top of that, the background in a legislative branch and knowing because, I mean, we have a very powerful governor in New Jersey, but we also have a very powerful legislature in New Jersey, right? Yeah. So how do you navigate that? How do you build the coalitions? I think all of that is really helpful to thinking through how you're going to lead New Jersey.
Yeah. I guess that segues into my next question. So in Congress for the last, what is it now, 6 years?
So this is my fifth
year. Okay.
Right? No. This is my sixth year. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7th year.
Oh, even better. Yeah.
Yes.
So,
I was a history major.
Yeah.
I have a Bachelor of Science from an engineering school, and I was a history major, so I think it's showing.
I was a political science major. I have an MBA too, but that's not really like a lot of math, I mean, I guess kind of. It doesn't matter. So I couldn't do it either. But so from Congress, why governor? Why are you running for governor?
So I'm really proud of the work I've done in Congress. In only my second term, I was named the most effective legislator from New Jersey. And I think that's because I worked really hard to build broad coalitions of people. It's actually how I ran my first race. I was running in a Trump district, and I had to really connect with people and really connect on those issues that everybody cared about. So whether you were in the People's Republic of Montclair or Lake Kapakong where they had MAGA flags, like people cared about the state and local tax deduction or how we were going to fund infrastructure or what we were going to do about healthcare costs. So all of these things brought people together, building those coalitions to deliver. I continued that work in Congress. And like I said, I'm really proud of that. But right now, instead of finding that work led to Congress working better, I think we see it even more partisan now than it was when I entered. Mm-hmm. And the focus on kind of that balance of focus on policy versus politics seems to have almost gone totally towards politics. I don't think the legislative body right now, in the wake of an executive that is ignoring court orders, ignoring Congress and congressional appropriations, and it just is driving a chaotic tariff regime. I just, with all of that going on, the place where it feels like there is a real opportunity to protect rights and freedoms and also drive down costs in New Jersey is in Trenton. It's the governor, and somebody I was talking to earlier said, maybe the founding fathers knew what they were talking about with this federalism system, right?
Yeah, right.
So we have the ability outside of what's going on in the chaos in Washington to chart a different path forward. And it's hard to envision having this much of an ability to do just that in Washington. And then also, I think we see too much coming from Washington.
Right.
I mean, we need to start thinking in the states about what people want and
yes.
and what is going right
Yeah.
and what is.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I'm down there and I'm like, look, we gotta drive down housing costs. We've got to make sure that we are looking at this broken healthcare system. What are we going to do about transportation and infrastructure? We passed the IRA. Now that has to get out on the ground. Now we have to fix rural broadband, for Christ's sake.
Right.
We said we were going to do it. We appropriated the money to do it. What are we doing?
Yeah.
And so I think being on the ground in these states and building from the ground up, not the top down from Washington, is really powerful and especially right now really necessary.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And like we were talking off mic with some of your staff before about how like the majority of this show for its 3.5-year lifespan has been primarily local businesses and nonprofits, but also even more so like hospitality businesses and all that kind of stuff. And like a lot of the things that like I talk to them and just kind of like pain points. Like it's hard to start a business in New Jersey or like run a small business in New Jersey. Like there's so many things we can go down a rabbit hole, and I know we're getting like short on time, and I don't want to like just do that to you. But yeah, it's just something that I've noticed, and just like talking to them and having like, with like all the big events coming to Jersey, because it's coming to Jersey, not New York, like the World Cup next year, like all these things, like how do local businesses take advantage of that and not just get lost in the shuffle and, kind of get left behind? Because I think that happens more so than people care to realize, you know what I mean?
Well, that's just it. I mean, we can talk about the broad ways in which small businesses are being impacted by the chaotic tariff regime, right? Like the local coffee shop just sent out a note saying prices are going to go up because we import coffee beans.
Sure, yeah.
And we're talking to a local developers, like I've taken down all projects because, air conditioning units are going up 30 to 40%. Sure. But we also have to mind the store and mind the home front.
Yeah.
I mean, we got to fix permitting here. Because, one woman was telling me, I'm paying the rent, I'm all set up, I'm ready to open my restaurant, and I'm paying a lot of money for the rent, and I can't open because the permitting's taking forever.
Yeah.
And so we have a huge issue of red tape and bureaucracy. And so if we are going to make sure that small businesses can take advantage of the World Cup coming here or get the tourism dollars from the 250th anniversary of our nation, so much of the fight which took place right here in New Jersey,
sure,
we have to invest in that. And then we have to have communications programs to tell small businesses, how can you take advantage of it? Like, look, we're going to be, as a state, pushing people to this historic site. So all you main streets around it should be aware. And here's some stuff. Here's the way you get involved with the Bureau of Tourism. Here's as people are coming to the World Cup and saying, I think they were telling me, I think FIFA was telling me about 75% of the people that come to the World Cup don't even go in the stadium.
Well, yeah, the stadium only holds 80,000 people. There's going to be like millions of people coming down here.
Right? So they're going to the fan zones. They're
right.
going down to Atlantic City. And then they're gonna, some number of them say, hey, while I'm here, wouldn't it be neat to learn a little about the United States, learn
sure.
a little about their history? Because, oh, by the way, it's the 250th anniversary of this nation.
Yeah,
so
right.
where did it all start? Oh, by the way, New Jersey.
Yeah.
So taking advantage of that opportunity and showing small businesses, okay, we're funneling these tourists here. You should be ready for X. We will put you on this website as places to eat, places to go see,
right.
hotels to sleep in, little shops that are cool. And maybe you want to get some, 250th tchotchkes for the tourists,
sure.
or FIFA 250 whatever.
Yeah.
But helping these small businesses be aware of all this takes an effort by the government, and then it just takes moving stuff out quickly. So you can't have like a pamphlet sitting on somebody's desk
right.
for 5 weeks, right?
Yeah.
You have to keep moving. You have to have that desire in Trenton to serve the people of New Jersey,
sure.
not to block people from progress.
Yeah. I love that answer. And like I said, small businesses are like the core of everything that we do, from the podcast to the radio station to our Jersey Fest events, everything. Like, it's important to us, and those are our people, so we're always interested to hear what people have to say about that. But I'm curious, and I'm sure these are few and far between if you ever even get one, but if you just have a day where you got nothing to do, you got the kids, you got your husband, and you guys are going to do something in Jersey, what is like the quintessential Jersey day for you? What are you doing? Where are you going? Where are you eating? Like, what are you gonna do?
Oh, that is a great question. I love that. So it's there's a lot of stuff that I would like to say we do, and I've done before,
Sure.
and I think it's cool, like the Delaware Water Gap and different stuff. But what we actually do is we, grab coffee at a place like Java Love, and then we go take the dog up to Eagle Rock, and we just hike through the woods up there. And then we come back and often go to, I don't have just days off, because if I have a day when I'm not working here, I'm going to soccer and lacrosse games at places like Watchung Field or Fortunato or Brookdale Park or far afield, but, run around town with that. Then we stop by, as my kids call it, Bel Giovanni's for subs, and everybody gets their favorite. I like the eggplant parm, and with long hots on it. That's key.
Wow.
Yeah, no, it makes it.
I might have to try that.
Yeah. It's on Bloomfield Ave.
Okay. We've been to Bel Giovanni's,
okay.
But I've never had.
The long hots make it. Yeah. I'm telling you. Even if you like a meatball parm or something, it's the long hots. And then if we're not too inundated with Italian food, we might go to Star Tavern or order out from Toro Sushi.
Sure.
That's usually what we do.
We love Star Tavern too. It's great. But
it's so good. Right by Cemetery in an industrial park. I love it.
Those are the best places sometimes,
right?
Like the random holes in the wall.
Yep.
Well, this has been great, and I really appreciate you having me to your offices and, talking with me for the last 45 minutes. It was great getting to know you like a little bit more on like a personal level than just kind of seeing you on Instagram or the TV or whatever. So thank you so much.
I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So this has been the Greenest Big RSA podcast. I'm Mike Ham. That was Congresswoman Mikie Sherrill. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.